Before he was a leader, he was a fisherman. Before he was called Pope, he was simply Simon, impulsive, passionate, and deeply human. But he was chosen. Called out from the shorelines of Galilee not because of greatness, but because of surrender. Jesus looked into the eyes of a man the world would have overlooked and saw the foundation of a kingdom that would never be shaken. This is the story of Peter, the first among equals, the rock on which Christ would build his church. A story of failure, forgiveness, fire, and faith. And it still speaks today. He was not trained in the law. He had no rabbinical robes, no titles, no prestige. Only calloused hands, worn from casting nets under the Galilean sun. Simon, son of Jonah, a man of the sea, rough around the edges, loud in conviction, quick to act before thinking. A fisherman by trade, a man of routine, who likely thought his story had already been written. But then came a voice that disrupted everything. "Follow me," Jesus said. No elaboration, no theological explanation, just a sentence that split time in two. Simon looked up, and something in the rabbi's eyes made the world fall silent. No one had ever spoken to him like that. With authority, with love, with purpose. And Simon dropped his net. He left behind more than tools, he left behind identity, income, comfort, and control. He stepped out of the familiar waters of Galilee and into the deep mystery of discipleship. He didn't know what lay ahead. That storms would rise, that crowds would gather, that miracles would happen in his hands, that fear would test his faith. He didn't know that one day, his name would echo through centuries. But that was the beginning. God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And on that shoreline, a fisherman began walking toward a future only heaven could see. They had seen him heal the sick, raise the dead, and calm the wind with a word. But on the road to Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked a question that pierced deeper than any miracle. "Who do you say that I am?" Others hesitated, Simon did not. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in that moment, heaven answered back. "Blessed are you, Simon son of Jonah, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Simon, the unstable one, the one prone to speak too soon, act too fast, was renamed Peter, Petros, the rock. Not because he was strong, but because Christ would be strong through him. This was not just a new name, it was a divine calling. To hold the keys of the kingdom, to bind and loose on earth what would be bound and loosed in heaven, to be the foundation of something eternal. But transformation is never instant. The rock would still stumble, the leader would still fall, the fire in him would still flicker. Yet Jesus was not building his church on perfection. He was building it on faith, the kind that gets back up, the kind that clings to Christ even when everything else breaks apart. Peter had received his name. Now he would have to grow into it. He had sworn he would never fall. Even if all fall away. I never will. Peter had meant every word. His love for Jesus burned hot, his loyalty felt unshakable, but the hour of darkness exposes more than resolve, it reveals the heart. The night was cold, and fear hung in the air like smoke. Jesus had been arrested, the disciples had scattered, and Peter followed, at a distance. By a fire in the courtyard, the questions came. "Aren't you one of his?" "No. I don't know the man." 3 times he was asked, 3 times he denied. And then the rooster crowed. Peter remembered the words, the warning, the prophecy. And then, the look. Jesus turned and looked straight at him. Not with hatred, not with surprise, but with a sorrow that pierced deeper than any sword. Peter ran into the night, weeping bitterly. The rock had cracked, the bold disciple had fallen. But grace was not finished with him. For every denial, Jesus would later offer a chance to reaffirm. For every failure, a path to restoration. Because this is what redemption looks like, it is not earned in strength but received in surrender. Peter would never forget his lowest moment, but he would also never forget that the one he denied was the same one who forgave him. The sun was rising over Galilee. The same shores where Peter once dropped his nets now echoed with memory, of failure, of fear, of silence. And yet Jesus came, not with rebuke, but with breakfast. The fire crackled, fish sizzled, and the question was asked, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" 3 times the question, 3 times the chance to respond. "Yes, Lord. You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep." This was no mere forgiveness. This was reinstatement, restoration, recommissioning. Jesus didn't shame him, he didn't rewind the failure or hold it over his head. He reached into Peter's wound and healed it, not by ignoring it, but by transforming it. The one who had denied him was now trusted to care for his flock. Peter would not return to who he was, he would become who he was always meant to be. From this moment forward, his life was no longer his own. The cross was no longer just Christ's destiny, it would become Peter's as well. "Follow me," Jesus said once again. And Peter did. Not as the impetuous fisherman, but as the shepherd. Not in fear, but in faith. Because grace does not just lift us from the dust, it sends us forward, transformed. They were hidden behind closed doors. Waiting, praying, unsure. But then the wind came. A sound from heaven like a mighty rushing storm filled the house, tongues of fire rested on each of them. And suddenly, the man who once trembled before a servant girl stood before thousands, unafraid. Peter, now filled with the Holy Spirit, raised his voice. "Men of Israel, listen to me," he preached Christ crucified, boldly, clearly, with fire not his own. This was no longer the Peter of denial, this was the apostle of proclamation. The same lips that once spoke fear now thundered with truth. "This Jesus, whom you crucified, God has raised him up. Let all Israel know that God has made him both Lord and Christ." Conviction swept through the crowd like wildfire. And on that day, 3,000 souls believed and were baptized. The church was born. Not in comfort, but in power. Not in safety, but in surrender. Peter, the first to declare Jesus as Messiah, was now the first to declare him risen. And just as Christ had promised, the keys had turned. Heaven had opened, and the gospel had begun its march through history, on the voice of a man once broken, now burning. He had walked with Jesus, preached to multitudes, seen the lame rise and the dead breathe again. But Peter's greatest work was not in miracles, it was in shepherding. He strengthened the brethren, he stood before councils, chains on his wrists and fire in his eyes. He wrote letters that still steady the church today, words forged in suffering, soaked in hope. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory. Yet his path would end where the church would one day rise, Rome. A city of empire, blood, and persecution. Tradition tells us that in the shadow of Nero's tyranny, Peter was sentenced to die, not as a rebel, but as a witness. And when the moment came, he made a final request, that he not be crucified like his Lord, but upside down. Unworthy, he said, to die in the same manner as Jesus. The cross, once a symbol of shame, had become his honor. The fisherman who once feared for his life gave it freely. Not as a failure, but as a foundation. Because true leadership does not cling to position, it pours itself out. And the church he helped birth did not end with his death, it grew. Rooted in blood, raised in faith, alive with the Spirit. He was not crowned with gold or seated on thrones, he bore no title when he walked the earth. And yet the early church remembered him not only as a disciple, not merely as an apostle, but as the first among them. The one entrusted with keys, the one called the Rock. In time, they would come to call him by another name. Papa, Father, Pope. Not because Peter sought power, but because he bore responsibility. He was the voice that spoke when the silence was thick, the hand that steadied when the church was new. Through storms of persecution, confusion, and growth, Peter's leadership endured. Not through domination, but through testimony. Not by might, but by a crucified love. Even today, his name is spoken in every language. His letters are still read in churches across the globe, his tomb lies beneath the altar of a basilica that bears his name. But his true legacy is not written in marble, it is inscribed on hearts. Every time the gospel is preached, every time the church stands firm in truth, the echo of Peter's bold confession resounds again, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And still today, Christ builds his church on that rock. He was a man of weakness, yet chosen for strength. A man who sank in fear, yet walked on water by faith. He denied, he wept, he rose again. And through him, Jesus showed the world what grace can build. Peter was not perfect, but he was surrendered, and that made all the difference. Because God does not need flawless vessels, he uses willing ones. The rock still stands. Not because of Peter, but because of the one who called him. And through every trial the church has faced, from Rome to the farthest reaches of the earth, his legacy remains: follow Christ, feed his sheep, and never stop proclaiming, even to the end. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.